E.T. Marie 93 says, on the topic of quitting, a question I've been thinking about is, when is it time to quit? How do you know when to put something down? Or phrased another way, how do you decide which goals to pursue and which ones to drop? Since we all have limited time and resources, we can't just do all the things, unfortunately.
So I'm going to say this up front. This is not something I am good at. In fact, this is quite a struggle for me knowing when to quit something. So most of what I have to say about it is probably going to be from the perspective of here's why you should be good at that, because it kind of sucks to not be. And I would love to point out some of the reasons why it sucks. But I'm hoping that you bring some good insight on how to know when to quit, because I could use that.
I think we could all use that. But I want to. I feel like there's a lot of different ways you could take this or apply it to. So I'm kind of wondering what you think the scenario is. Because for me, when I read this, I there's a couple different ways that I thought about it. And one way would be sort of on, a larger scale. You have, let's say someone wants to be a musician. They're an aspiring musician, right? And they have worked for, I don't know, 10 years, working as hard as they can because they want to make it as, say, a songwriter or something. They worked for 10 years and they haven't, received the success that they want. And so they're asking, do I quit or do I continue? So that would be one scenario. Another would be, I don't know, let's say that same person loves music and wants to continue, fighting for success. But then they also start falling in love with, let's say, I don't know, baseball or something, right? And so they fall in love with music and baseball, and they don't know which one to do, and they only have time for one of them, and so they're not sure which one to quit. So I don't know, what type of scenario or example in your own life do you apply this question to?
So what you're saying is kind of the one end of the spectrum of pretty big stuff, life goal type stuff.
Brian.
And I want to talk about that to some degree at least, but it's a little bit scary for me almost to think about. So I also try to think about it on a bit of the smaller scale, which is just hobbies or day-to-day stuff, little things. The example that really came up for me is my relationship with reading books. And I've brought it up a few times how I like to read, but then I have trouble reading, and sometimes my focus is not good enough. And that's actually a particular thing that I was frustrated with. And we talked through a little bit of that and how we think the modern smartphone internet era is a big reason for that. But in terms of this, I am the type of person who never quits reading a book. I'm unwilling to do that. What I do instead is I fail to finish a book, and then I feel really guilty about it. Like there's this unfinished book in the back of my head that I failed to get through. And then I don't read for a while because every time I think about reading, I feel kind of crappy about it. And I have
Like
to go
crappy
through.
about moving on to a different book.
So here's, yeah. It's like instead of getting partway through a novel and going, you know what? This is just not really for me. This is not revving my engine like I thought it would. And just closing the book and putting it down and going, that's fine. Maybe the next one will be better. That's not what I do. What I do is I grind it out to halfway through, and then the next day I can see the book and I think, I don't really want to read, whatever. And then I put it off day after day, like this sort of procrastinating thing. Like I'm procrastinating this task of reading a book that I don't really want to read. And eventually it just ends. It's as if somebody made this tiny little microchip and inserted it somewhere in my brain, and just from then on, it radiates this tiny little bit of guilt for the rest of my life. And it's just there forever. I still think about Seven Eves, which is this Neil Stephenson book that I loved, and I read 2/3 of it. But then there's like this really big shift in the book. It has this big time jump, and all the characters. This is, I guess, kind of a spoiler. So sorry. Not really, but kind of. It's a great book. But there's this big time jump, and I just like kind of didn't emotionally feel invested anymore, and I put it down for a while, and I just never finished it. I didn't quit reading it because I didn't go, yeah, this is fine, I'm done. Instead, I just procrastinated off to infinity, and now I feel guilty about that. And that was years ago, and I still remember that. Anytime somebody brings up Neil Stephenson, I'm like, oh yeah, remember that book.
I read, I think, the first 4 or 5 books of the Dark Tower series, Stephen
Hmm.
King, and I haven't finished it because after Wolves of the Calla or whatever, I just did not want to suffer anymore because that was so bad. But I've always wanted to finish it, and it's always been in the back of my mind, like, oh, I want to finish the Dark Tower series. But okay, well, that's a good example. Is that
Yeah.
you should probably decide to quit or just finish it.
Yeah. And this is the reason I bring it up is that, first off, there's definitely a difference between quitting and failing. And failing is not so great. I mean, it depends on what you're talking about. And sometimes trying really hard and failing can be great, and that's part of the process and so on, right? But that's not really what I mean here. In this scenario, it's one thing to just make a conscious choice of, you know what, I'm not into this. I'm going to read something else, or I'm just going to put this down, and that's fine. Maybe I'll come back to it later. Maybe I won't. But I'm quitting this book consciously. And that's okay. It's not a reflection on me. It's not something I need to feel guilty about. I don't need to hate myself for never finishing anything. Like, there doesn't need to be this giant explosion of emotional baggage. You can just quit that. And again, this is something I struggle with, but I've learned a little bit more about myself, and I'm getting a little better here. So there's a difference between those two. And the side effect of being somebody who tends to fail at reading books versus somebody who occasionally quits at reading books is that because of that guilt and that sort of weird self-judgment-y cycle, I mean, it's not like this huge thing that I'm lying awake with, but it's this small little thing where I kind of have this judgment around me. It makes it to where picking up a new book becomes a lot harder because I don't have this little escape valve of, hey, I can pick up this book. I don't know if it's going to be good or not, but if it's not good, I could just stop reading it. Instead, I have this whole, should I read this? What if it's not good? That's like 7 hours of my life invested in this thing. What if I can't get through it? And it becomes a weirdly big decision that it makes no sense to have that kind of relationship with just reading a freaking book, but I do.
Okay, I have an example, and this is an example of when I quit, and I
Okay.
think I made the right choice. But okay, so when we started doing our quest thing, and I start trying to develop a story and start doing some pictures, whatever, I started getting into writing for the first time ever. Something I always wanted to do but hadn't done.
Right.
And I start writing a little bit, and I start getting obsessed with it. And I'm watching videos from authors and listening to podcasts and writing stuff and reading stuff and just getting absorbed, submerged in this writing world. And I can just see myself just doing only that for the next year and a half or something and just exploring all of that. But then it kind of hit me, or it became very clear that I was only focusing on that, and I had completely abandoned, all of the drawing art side of it. And I realized, like, I had to take a step back and ask myself, like, what is the priority here? What am I actually trying to do? And
Mm-hmm.
it is not. I'm not trying to write a novel. I'm not trying to. Writing is not my priority. The art is the priority, so the writing has to take a back seat to that. So I kind of had to readjust what I was doing. And that type of thing comes up a lot where I start going down this rabbit trail and I just get consumed by it and I want to keep going. And then something kind of stops me and I have to rethink. And then I kind of come back to the priority,
Right.
which I assume that everyone has that, but I don't think everyone does. And I think some people, when they head down that rabbit trail, they sort of shift all of their priorities, and then they have to ask themselves, well, what is the priority? And then they don't know, and they get really confused, and they're not sure if they should quit or they should quit the other thing, or they should continue or what. And I see that type of thing come up a lot. So I'm wondering how you feel, or if that's something that happens to you. Do you find yourself switching priorities, or do you have a pretty clear idea of what you should include in your daily life versus what you should quit? Or like, do you have a good meter of being able to tell when to let go, or what?
Well, again, going back to what I said originally, no, I don't. But I'm working on it because I'm recognizing how important that is.
I almost want to. I'll disagree with you later because I feel like I could also use you as a really good example of how to make use of a lot of different interests, but I'll bring that up later.
Well, okay. Yeah. There's pros and cons to being a non-quitter, which is mostly what I am. Again, I don't say that as a necessarily positive thing about myself. I culturally we have this pretty strong idealization of this not quitting, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
a strong current in our culture of, yeah, we finish what we start. We, quitters never win and whatever. The way I think I would break this up roughly is that anything you do falls into a couple different categories. And one of the simplest is just the thing that I enjoy doing category. And this one, it feels like the most straightforward, where if reading is just something that I enjoy doing, it's just a thing that I want to do to help me relax, to let my mind explore some different things and go to different worlds type stuff, then it needs to fulfill that purpose. And if I'm reading a book and it isn't, assuming it's a fiction book or it's just a story that someone is telling me, and I'm just not enjoying it, it's not making me feel relaxed and so on, then I can't really think of much value beyond that. Like, it's probably time to just not do that. Where it might get a little blurrier is, okay, video games, right? I play video games because I want to enjoy them, right? I want to do something enjoyable, and for the most part, they are. But if you play a game like Hearthstone, or do you know what Hearthstone is? You don't.
I know what it is. I've never played it.
Okay. Well, whatever. Any game. Many games don't have, some story that begins and ends and has this arc in between. Some do, and when you play them, you start at the beginning of the story arc and then you get to the end. You play BioShock Infinite, you know when it's over, and it leaves you there just thinking about life and the universe and everything, and it's a thing, but it's over. Other games don't work like that, like Hearthstone. You open up Hearthstone, you play a game, and then you're done. And then you play another game, and then another game to infinity. You have cards that you're collecting and deck building, but it's built around this gameplay loop of there is no start and finish. So in theory, you would play that because you want to enjoy it. But the game developers know that that's not really enough, because if all you did was just open the game and play a game and then you were done, and then, okay, maybe you won, maybe you lost, and maybe you play another game, maybe you don't, like that's not enough of a hook for people. So they build in a metagame of rewards and daily things, and you open it up, and if you play 5 matches with this deck, then you get this kind of card reward or something. And I'm not saying that that's a terrible thing to do, but they build in all these mechanisms to try and incentivize you to keep coming back when otherwise you probably wouldn't have. It's almost like if you read a book, it's not just about reading the book anymore. It's about like I mean, you gain achievements for reading this many chapters, or you read this kind of book, and so now you get this reward or like reputation that other people can see. Like it's adding this other layer in it to try and make it more enticing to you. And the point with that is that I think that there's a lot of mechanism there to try and get you to do that thing, even though it's not really an enjoyable, entertaining pastime in some cases. Does that make sense to you as a non-gamer?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
continuous thing that may or may not even be enjoyable anymore. Maybe after
Right.
you play a certain amount of time, you just keep coming back, but you're not really totally sure why.
Right. And it's very intentional. They're trying to get you hooked. And again, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Some cases it's bad. Some cases it's fine to do daily quests, but it's clearly there to provide this extra motivation. Okay. I think that if you kind of look at that as one example of this happening, where you're kind of being pulled into something that maybe isn't actually that enjoyable anymore, even though that category of activity is just enjoyment, you're just doing it to enjoy it. This shows up in other enjoyment categories too, where maybe you like to like you have some sport that you like to play or some pastime that you do, but it's pretty easy to get to the point where you aren't enjoying it anymore, but you've built some kind of identity around it of I'm the type of person who collects coins or does this or does that. Like you have some narrative about yourself, or you feel like if you stopped doing this then you would be losing something, so you wind up continuing to do something that isn't actually that enjoyable anymore. I think that can happen, and it happens pretty easily. And at the end of the day, the question that really needs to be asked, if it is that kind of activity, is just, am I still enjoying this? Or I mean, of course, you don't enjoy it every second. Maybe you think, hey, the past 2 weeks that I've been doing this, have I been enjoying it? If the answer is not really, then like maybe it's time to let that go, at least for a while.
Yeah, that's a good example. Um, I've been trying to think of, okay, back in the day, I used to play Starcraft. I used to love it. Okay, I love Starcraft. But for
Yeah.
me, it was pure entertainment and obsession and competitiveness and all consuming. But when I finished playing after 6 hours or however long, I would have this feeling of, oh God, I'm empty. It wasn't something I backed away from and I felt super proud
Yeah.
of. I'm not saying you can't feel that way, but for me, it was, oh God, I just spent all my time doing that. I would be proud of myself if I had been doing this other thing. So for me, it had to come to this decision of, okay, this wonderful thing of fast-paced entertainment is coming at the detriment to the thing that would make me proud, so I have to get rid of it. That was the
Yeah.
defining moment of me calling it quits, is this is killing the other thing. And even though I love it so much, I have to get rid of it. And
Yeah.
that's
Well,
how I've gotten rid of a couple things. But
it's funny you bring that up because I actually stopped playing StarCraft about maybe a month ago. I haven't played it since. And so I probably should have stopped. I didn't quit forever, but I decided to set it aside. And I should have done this a while ago, like months ago, but I didn't. And it took me being on vacation for a week and just having a week completely away from it for me to go, okay, yeah, I need an extended break from this. And if you've listened to past episodes of the podcast, StarCraft is something that I've taken really seriously, and I even like made it a major goal to get into the Grandmaster League.
so
Which
I wanted to talk about this. Sorry,
okay,
finish your point, and then I'll go ahead.
no, that's it. Is that I decided to set it aside, and the main reason was that it wasn't fun. Uh, I had been it's always a challenging game. It's very frustrating, or it can be, but it up to that point, like it had been very enjoyable, and I'd been trying out these different ideas and exploring things and getting better and struggling here and there. But I just it was rewarding. Maybe that's a better word. It was rewarding. But then it got to the point where I felt like I just needed to play it. Like, oh no, I got to prove that I'm really good and, keep my skills super sharp and all of that. And I wasn't playing it because I really wanted to play it, or I was super excited about trying some new idea out or this new technique, or okay, I'm going to try to do one of
Right.
Andrew Huberman's little breathing exercises before I play to see if that helps me or something. It was more of just a grind, and I was doing it out of momentum and out of just this feeling like I needed to.
Right. Okay. So I was thinking of this during this week, and so often we chase down these interests that kind of just live in isolation, right? I mean, I can
Yeah.
go on a giant TV show binge, watch the whole thing, and then when I step away from it, it's like all of that energy just went to this little stagnant pond, and then I just left it, right? Like all of all
Right.
of that just went nowhere. It added to nothing. It just died, where it was.
Yeah.
And for years you played StarCraft, right? And it was, I'm not going to compare it to stagnant pool of it not
Well,
mattering.
you
It was
could
something
say,
that you enjoyed, right?
yeah.
Like for years you played StarCraft and you enjoyed it, but you kind of hit this wall and it was just kind of this thing that stayed there, right?
Right.
And you were probably in a similar place that you are right now, wondering, should I stop playing or should I play? Or I'm not really sure. Maybe I enjoy it. I don't know. Does that sound kind of right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair.
Okay. Until that isolated interest was connected to something else in your life, it just stayed that way.
Yeah.
And we had talked about it on the podcast, and then we decided to integrate it into this whole thing. And so it became this tool for using as examples and ways for you to experiment with, Huberman breathing exercises or whatever. I mean, it was this enriching thing. It went from this small entertainment thing to this whole life enrichment thing. I mean, so even though it's a game or whatever, like it's not just a game anymore. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just entertainment. It's this whole thing because instead of quitting, you just connected it to the rest of your life. And that type of thing fascinates me. And I think that way of thinking allows you to include a lot more interests than you otherwise would have to just leave them out. Does that sound right? Or
Yeah. It sounds right on the money, actually. It's funny. There was this line in a book that I was reading last week. It's a Jeff Vandermeer book. And it's this the main character, his grandfather is talking to him, and his grandfather dispenses this little bit of wisdom. He says, never do anything for just one reason. And for whatever that stuck with me. Um, just trying to think about that and how, yeah, I kind of agree. The more I reflect on that thought, is that I don't really want that isolated thing that, like you said, you do it, you pour all this energy in, and then it just kind of sits there by itself and you leave it.
right.
Um, when it connects, it becomes a lot more powerful. And
So go ahead.
no, just I think you're exactly spot on with the StarCraft thing, which is, I had plateaued, 100% plateaued. It was just purely in the entertainment category for me, and it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot. I had other friends that played it on leagues and teams and everything, but it was just kind of that level of, all right, I'm just gonna do this for it to be fun, and that's it. But when we started talking about it and really thinking about, hey, why can't I get better at this game? That created all these other connections that suddenly it mattered a lot more. And
Hmm.
it wasn't even just about getting better at StarCraft. It was about trying to figure out why I couldn't get better at StarCraft and what needed to change in me and my ways of thinking to actually get better. And it did work. And I got into that Grandmaster League. But then it that we started, or we stopped talking about that. We had kind of moved into some other ideas. Personally, I started prioritizing the personal project stuff a lot more. That's really what I was thinking about. And like, this is really important to me
Hmm.
right now. And so the interest and the value coming out of StarCraft wasn't quite the same anymore. And I think that's a big part of what got it into that point of just, okay, let's fire it up again. Let's play a bit. and it just didn't really have that same meaning to me.
Yes. There's like, well, okay. So when I was a kid, I used to make little videos, right? I used to make skate videos, and
With the stop motion, or do you
well, I
mean
also did the stop motion thing with the
okay?
Legos with Steven. We made wakeboard videos,
Mhm.
lots of different little fun videos. And I used to love doing that. And I've made a couple, little, I don't know, little personal films since then, but I haven't posted them anywhere. But I've always really liked film or just recording stuff. And I've always loved audio recording. I mean, I have all these tapes from back in the day when, I was writing music or played music with friends or at a concert or whatever. I just recorded things. And I have hundreds, if not thousands, of sample audio recordings on my phone. So I love recording. I love film stuff. I love drawing and painting. I also love music, but we'll leave that out of the equation for now. But what I'm trying to do right now is find a way to incorporate everything all into one. I mean, the podcast grew out of my love of recording and the love of just talking about this stuff. So it was already integrated into my life. And I think that's why we've been able to keep it going, at least for the most part.
We're still here,
Right. I don't want to jinx it, but yeah. So
right?
with all of this art stuff, I'm recording the process now. So when I'm doing a painting, I get to draw and then I get to do a ton of research, which is stuff that I just want to do anyway on any subject I want because I'm calling the shots now that it's, up to me.
Right.
And so I get to do all this research. I'm filming the process, so I'm, you know, enjoying just filming stuff. And I don't know, I'm finding all these different ways to just include all these different interests into one thing. So they all feed into each other. And it when it works well, it's just like the most amazing thing where everything feeds into the next thing. And it's like the main flow of your life. Well, this gets kind of weird, but you have like this mainstream part of your life. It's like the front part. It's in the front part of your brain. Like it's always on your mind. Like right now, you said the priority shifted to your programming stuff, right? My
Yeah.
priority has shifted to this, art stuff that I'm doing. And if you were looking at like a stage with the, first place, second place, third place, clearly my art stuff is on first place. And the writing had shifted into first place, but now it's on second
Right.
place or whatever. And maybe your Starcraft is on third place or just off the stand completely.
Yeah.
But when you find a new interest, if it's not a part of that number one, two, or three, or it's not somehow integrated, I you can almost feel it. It sucks you out of your main drive, and it starts to drain you instead of enriching everything else. And like sitting
Yeah.
watching TV for a week or something, like it's not, unless you're consciously trying to feed it back into stuff, it's just kind of draining you. It's not enriching the main line.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree, but you could take that in a couple different directions. One is that getting interested in something new is fun, and that's not something we should avoid entirely, right? I mean,
No, not at
you
all. That No, not what I'm saying at all. No.
you were the one I think saying when we were talking about the novelty problem and how things after a while just become stale. To me, I think it can be really helpful to just find something that's new and interesting, even if it isn't that related, because it can just, wake you up a little bit. But I agree in the sense that if you're thinking long term, if this thing that you're investing your time in, if it just doesn't really relate to the stuff that you really care about and you really want to kind of carry forward throughout the months and years, then yeah, it's kind of like this appendage that doesn't.
Yeah, and I shouldn't even say that in a negative way. Like it drains your energy or whatever. Like maybe eventually it will or whatever. But I don't think that's how it works. 'Cause sometimes it can be the one thing that's the most exciting or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess what I'm saying is that those types of isolated interests, they run a very high risk of getting to the point like you with StarCraft, where you're not really sure why you do it anymore, because I guess there's only one reason for you to have done it in the first place, which was, entertainment or curiosity or something. And maybe I think that just kind of trails off eventually, unless it's connected to everything else. So
Right.
yeah,
So one thought is, if it is something you want to keep doing, you could try and connect it to everything else, which
yeah,
is more or less what we do with StarCraft. Or I think the alternative is to categorize it as, novelty, entertainment, a thing that is fun, but I think it's important to be ready to kind of let that go as soon as it's not really
yeah,
fulfilling that role anymore. Like I said, with the entertainment stuff, it's actually easy to get wrapped up in the identity or just the metagame aspect of it, to where you don't even necessarily recognize when it becomes, something that isn't entertaining. I mean, it's well understood that gaming can become, some people will say it's an addiction. It's not technically recognized as an addiction. In my opinion, it's an addiction, because if it walks like a duck, then whatever. People get hooked on it where they can't stop. There's all kinds of behaviors that are, you know, somewhere on the spectrum of, okay to addiction, right? Like not healthy. You can get
right,
kind of wrapped up in those things where you're just doing it because it's the thing that you do. It's almost compulsive. I mean, obviously, infinite scroll sites fit this role of it's just a thing that you do. Um,
yep.
and it's not rewarding most of the time. You're not walking away from that going, yeah, I'm really glad that I just spent an hour scrolling through Instagram. So yeah, if it's that category, then that's the thing you really got to watch out for is this actually enjoyable, entertaining to me anymore? I think it could go those two different directions.
So I feel like, well, this helped me a lot, but it's gonna seem like just a, I don't know, kind of a cop out suggestion. But I suggest making a bubble diagram. Uh, to One thing to do to help recognize what something means to you, because it's easy to talk about. It's much harder to see it in your life. What's important to you, what is just a thing for entertainment, what actually makes you proud or fulfilling or whatever. It's hard to see it all. So a couple
Yeah.
months ago, I made this. It was kind of crappy, but I made this big diagram of all the things that I did and like where my time was going. I mean, it wasn't that complex. It was just a couple bubbles, but it really helped me see, you know, where I was putting my time, and it helped me prioritize just, what's important to me. And it's real easy if you stand back and just look at you know, these little sections of things you spend your time on. It's very easy to see what you're proud of and what you're kind of like, I probably shouldn't do that anymore. It's really easy to see. So I don't know what are some ways that you would approach trying to identify these different items, things that are entertaining or things that are fulfilling or, you know.
Yeah. Well, a bubble diagram is not maybe what I would have thought of, but something similar. To me, probably journaling about it would be what I
Yeah.
would go to, but just some form of trying to bring some clarity and thought to what those things actually are. So if I had stopped to write down, okay, why am I playing StarCraft right now? Why am I investing 2 hours a day into this game? If I had written that all out, probably would have been pretty clear. Like, the intention was to learn from it and, you know, have fun and
Right.
all those things. But then the obvious response to that is, well, is that happening right now? And the answer would have been, no, not really. It's mostly a source of frustration. And I'm doing it out of this kind of identity, self image thing of, I got to be really
Yeah.
good at this game because that's how I see myself. And like, that's not the best motivator. So yeah, I
And
making stuff explicit and writing it out, I think, is a really good tool for that.
but also it's got to be hard to let it go. I mean, it was really hard for me to
Yeah.
kind of stop that momentum and excitement on the writing stuff and kind of refocus. It was tough. And I can imagine for you to let go of StarCraft completely, it's got to be hard because you have been wrapped up in this idea of becoming,
Right.
super good at it. And if you stop playing it, your ranking's gonna fall, your skills are gonna
Yeah,
deteriorate. Like,
absolutely. Well, that kind of goes back to what I was attempting to say with the reading books thing, is that I recognize this in myself and that I have a tendency to fail at stuff, fail via the procrastination pipeline of just stopping it. And but what I mean by fail is that I want to keep doing it, but I don't. And there isn't a conscious decision. It's just this perpetual guilt thing of me not doing the thing that I still want to do. Like, I tend to do that, and I do not think that is healthy at all. I think it is far healthier to just make a conscious choice and go, you know what? StarCraft 2 is just not really doing it for me right now, and I'm going to set it aside because I don't want to be playing for these reasons. I want to be playing if these reasons are lined up, where it's fun and I'm learning and I'm excited about it and it has value in other
right.
areas. Like, so making the conscious choice to quit versus just fizzling out and feeling crappy, like, oh, I wanted to get so good but I couldn't, and I guess I'm just not that great, and like this identity thing around it, that's not the avenue I want to take. So I think quitting it, at least temporarily, was really the right choice there, and I feel pretty good about it.
Good. That's that's something we've sort of been talking about, or sort of a theme, is the flippant decision making. In that you
Yeah.
can get stuck indefinitely in the, well, I want to keep doing it, but it doesn't really make sense anymore. I don't really know, and you just feel like that forever, and you never
Yeah.
make the decision. And I think with working on my art stuff right now, I've been trying to make, as soon as I start recognizing that real uneasiness, it's like, okay, set a timer for 5 minutes, come up with a decision, and then move on, you
Right.
know, and trying to just weed that kind of thing out, because it's like, if you start feeling like that for a couple days about a book, you need to decide, either finish the damn thing or just get rid
Yeah.
of it. You have to just make that decision, because that uneasiness just kind of kills, it can bleed into other areas.
Yeah, there was, so I was listening to the Andrew Huberman podcast earlier today, because that's like one of the few podcasts that I tend to keep up with. But he said something, uh it was an older episode about endurance and muscular training and stuff. And he mentioned something that I just really, really liked, which is the cognitive load of trying to make a choice is a real thing. Like, it is genuinely difficult to debate and agonize over a decision. That is fatiguing to you. Even if it's only in your head, it's still fatiguing. It still releases hormones like epinephrine and cortisol and stuff. So in his example, he's talking about, going out for a run in the morning. And the point is, if you spend half an hour going, should I run? Should I not? It's going to be hard. I got to psych myself up. And you're going through all this mental gymnastics to try to get yourself out there to do it. You're cutting into your ability to do the run, because that's fatiguing. Like, making those choices is fatiguing. And it's not quite the same thing that we're talking about, but I think it still applies in that if you're debating whether you should do something or not, I mean, me spending a month or two going, StarCraft, I don't know, should I play, should I not? Like, that's just draining by itself, on top of StarCraft being draining already, because again, I wasn't really getting a lot out of it at the time. So it's kind of a double whammy, and just I'm getting completely worn down between debating this thing and having all these self-judgments and then doing this thing that's difficult, that's not that rewarding. And it winds up being a pretty major thing. It's just really taken a lot out of me that could easily be going
Yeah.
somewhere else that's rewarding. But even on a smaller scale, just if I'm sitting there in a bookstore going, should I read it? Should I not? Is it worth it? Maybe I should Google it. Maybe I should search around. Like, I could just read the first couple chapters, and if I don't like it, it's fine. And plenty of other people would have no problem. Like you said, the flippancy where you can just do something, and if it's doesn't work out, that's fine. You don't have to make it into this giant mountainous mental thing. And then it's pretty
Right.
easy to just try stuff and not do it. One of the, I may have mentioned this before, but there was this major moment in my life and this is going way back to when I was teenager and I had a lot of social anxiety. I had a really, really hard time going places, being around people, God forbid some kind of party or something that was just so anxiety inducing to me that I pretty much never did it. But when I did, I would go and I would be there forever, like until it's over, 4 or 5 hours later. And if I was having a bad time, well, that's a 5 hour long bad time. And I remember when I don't know why I couldn't understand this sooner, but someone said something once about going somewhere. They're just like, oh, yeah, if it's not fun, we'll leave in like 20 minutes. And I'm like, what? You can do
Can
that?
do that.
You can just leave if you don't like it? That was a game changer. Because then I could go somewhere and it doesn't have to be this, oh my God, what if it's not fun?
Right.
It's just, if I don't like it, I'll leave. I'll just say something like, oh, sorry, I gotta go somewhere else or whatever. Nothing. Nobody cares. You just leave. That was so freeing to me that it doesn't have to be this huge emotional thing that you have to psych yourself up for. It can just be, hey, you go. If you want to quit the party, then quit the freaking party. It makes it so much easier to go somewhere
Yeah.
in the first place if you just know that you don't have to finish it.
So here's an example of it's almost like backwards. Oh, kind of. So on this painting that I'm working on, I had done the drawing and I was ready to go into the actual painting portion. But before I did, I like to do like a little color study just to make sure the colors are going to transfer to the big board. So I thought I had it all figured out, and I do the color study, and it doesn't feel right. I don't totally know why, but it just doesn't work. And I thought to myself, okay, I could just make a decision right off the bat and just go with this, but it didn't feel right. So I decided kind of quickly to do another one. And I did that one and it didn't feel right. And I ended up doing 10 of them. Okay. And the first nine, they just didn't work. And I kept trying different ways of doing it and different colors or mixtures or whatever. And none of them felt right. And even though I knew I could just make a decision and go with something, I knew that that uneasiness would stick with me. On the 10th one, it finally it sparked joy. It felt good. And I was like, okay, perfect, I'll go with that. And then I ran with that. But it was, it almost felt backwards. It was like I was searching
Mm-hmm.
for the joy or for the right feeling. But it was cool that I was able to recognize it. Like I could, in the past, I would have done one or two and then just chosen that and moved forward. But this time I was like, I was really aware of how it felt. And I knew that all of those just, they didn't feel right. So I wasn't going to go with them. So I guess I've started paying attention since we've started talking about it, just paying attention to the uneasiness as this thing that I don't want. And I don't want to move forward if I don't feel it. And yeah, does that make sense, or does that just make it more confusing?
No, I think it does. To me, this is kind of another category of thing that I wanted to bring up a little bit, which is, okay, if something's supposed to be enjoyable, then you evaluate it based on those lines. If something is long term that you care about, you would think about it differently. There's also this category of almost like, well, for me, what I was thinking of was stuff that you're doing for the sake of self betterment, which I was probably not quite what you're talking about. You're talking about a particular project that you're trying to move forward, but in my mind, exercise, right? Like if you
Mhm.
started a weightlifting program and you're not, I mean, maybe you
Wait,
enjoy
did
it.
you just assume I'm not already on one?
I'm the hypothetically, are you
I'm
on a
kidding.
weightlifting program?
No,
Okay,
no.
well,
But
then relax.
okay.
I didn't assume that anyway, but let's say you did, right? You start lifting weights. And the goal is to get stronger and maybe look better and feel better and that kind of thing, right? But it's not, you're not doing it because it's really fun and you enjoy it like the same way you would watch a show. You're doing it for self
Hmm.
betterment. So, how do you know, how do you evaluate that? Because it's pretty easy to wind up lifting weights and just not really getting anywhere. There, I mean, I've
Right.
certainly witnessed this and been this person where you're doing something that just isn't really working for whatever reason, but you don't go, oh, I'm not enjoying it, so I'm going to drop it, because that isn't the point. The point is self betterment. So how do you kind of evaluate where it ought to be, or how much stronger do you need to get, or how do you
Right.
kind of draw the lines around that?
I That's the same feeling as the Starcraft thing, right? Like you don't have, you only got that one reason for it. You just know that you should exercise, you should lift weights or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's not feeding into the rest of your life.
Yes, but I mean, you want it to feed into your life in the sense that
Right. You
strength
have to
training
figure
is,
out, yeah.
well, but I feel like there's another element there too, which is, okay, let's say you start a weightlifting program this month and you don't get any stronger. You know, you're able to bench press, for you, we'll say 1,000 pounds as an example.
It's
And
a
you're,
little low, but okay, yeah.
all right, right. So you're bench pressing 1,000 pounds, and then in 3 months you're still bench pressing 1,000 pounds. So do you keep going? Do you not? What do you do?
Well, I mean, if it's not working, you should probably change it, right?
I guess my thinking is, in the fitness world, at least, not just fitness, but when I think about self improvement things, my rule is 1 month for most of this. Like, there should be tangible improvement after a month, and if there's not, then something's wrong and you need to change.
Okay, so you apply the 1 month rule or something to,
Yeah, for like in this self betterment category, I think when I really think about it, I think I have a 1 month rule. And fitness is pretty straightforward because you can measure it, or if you aren't, then you're doing it wrong, in my not very humble opinion. If you're running, then you should see some form of improvement along some variable, right, within a month. So you should be able to run farther, or you should be able to run faster, or your intervals are longer, or something, right? And if it's
yeah.
not, then you're overtraining, or your program is bad, or you're not sleeping right, or something. Same for lifting. You know, if you're lifting and it's not better in a month in some noticeable way, then something's wrong, and it's time to change. Or maybe you're not working hard enough, or you're working too hard, or something. But I think that I like to apply that rule to just across the board. Anything that's supposed to be making you better, say on a guitar, right? If you're thinking, I want to be a better player, so I'm going to play scales for 10 minutes every day, and I'll play these scales, and maybe you play with a metronome or something, right? But
Hmm.
it's like an eat your vegetables type of exercise. It's just a thing that you're doing to try to be better, get faster. You want it to make your guitar playing better. I think the way to evaluate that is somewhere around the 1 month timeline, where if you start it now and at the end of the month, you aren't better in some measurable way, then it's a bad plan and you should try something else.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I do that. Um, I do that pretty often, but not, maybe not with the 1 month term. I just,
I mean,
it's
a month
probably
is
more
kind of
random.
arbitrary. Right.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of how I mean, I do the same thing. You ask yourself, am I improving or no? Is this working? Is it not working?
Right.
But it does seem to be pretty arbitrary. And I think having something like a specific 1 month could probably be really helpful.
Yeah. Again, that's for me, that kind of comes from the fitness world, because you can't
Yeah.
go by a week because it's too short. You know, if you started a new program, you're probably going to be, super sore and weak after that first week, because, you're just worn down. It's a new thing. But a month timeline is enough to where if it were working, it should show up and it should be measurable. Then you can kind of make that evaluation. I think that
Right.
covers most things. I think that when it comes to other stuff like practicing your scales on a guitar or whatnot, it's a lot fuzzier, but I think that's a problem. And I think it helps to try and evaluate it along those lines of, you kind of need a concrete deadline. So if nothing else, just to think about that is pretty valuable. Say, hey, I'm going to try playing scales for 10 minutes a day, which is a lot. That's a big time investment that you could be investing somewhere else if you're trying to be a better guitar player. So
Right.
you invest that time, and then you figure out what your timeline is to evaluate if you're getting better at it. And this is sort of implied, but you have to have some way of measuring it, which is often overlooked. Where if you're just kind of doing it and you don't really know how fast you're doing it, or you don't really know how many mistakes you're making, then it's pretty hard to evaluate whether it's working or not. And to me, that's kind of a problem most of the time. If you can't figure out if it's helping you, then you're sort of just shooting blind, and that usually doesn't work. So that's kind of my system there. And I bring it up because I think it's a bit different than what we were talking about before, which is things that you're passionate about, things that you're interested in, a
Mm-hmm.
project that has sort of a, it's pretty clear whether you've painted a painting or not. If it's just this thing that you're doing to make you better,
Right.
I think you have to evaluate it along some different lines. And I think as much as possible, you want concrete metrics that you can use to say, yep, I'm getting better at this. And then you have some time window where you can actually look at those things.
No, I'm glad you bring that up because when we are talking about quitting, you typically think, you either do the thing or you're not. And you're not saying if you practice guitar for a month and you're not better, you should quit guitar. You're
Right.
saying whatever you're doing, maybe you quit that and try a different method. And that's kind of what I was saying at the very beginning is that that person or the aspiring musician after 10 years, they don't know if they should quit or not. I think, maybe they should have checked before 10 years. But if it's not working after a year or a month or whatever, you ask yourself, or you tell yourself, no, it's not working. I'm going to try something else. You don't necessarily have to quit, but you should try a different method, change it up. I wish to God I had thought just that simple thing many years ago when I was playing music. I wish I had a way to just judge that or see the bigger picture of, oh no, it's not working. Stop doing it. Try something else. I wish I had done that, but I decided to do the same things over and over and over again for years and not get anywhere.
Well, and yeah, that's if you think about it in the context of guitar playing, I think in some cases your ability to recognize when you should quit doing one particular thing, like the scales or whatever your practice routine is, um, can affect the overall picture of if you aren't able to do that and you're spinning your wheels a lot of the time and not getting better, then you wind up at the end of that 10-year stretch going, I'm not that great. Or, my skills haven't progressed where I wanted to, or I was investing time in the wrong things and, I wanted to be writing music, but I wasn't. And, I
Right.
can just play a bunch of old Eddie Van Halen solos that nobody cares about. Your
And
ability to quit on the smaller scale can affect the results of like the larger thing, I think is what I'm saying.
and like you were saying before, we are, I mean, as a society, we're obsessed with, success. And if you fail at something, you suck and you're a failure and you're a quitter or whatever. And a lot of times we have sort of conditioned ourselves to push through frustration like indefinitely. Like we will torture ourselves because we want to be good or we feel like that's what you have to do, hard work and frustration and all of that. That's what you have to do in order to be good at something. But actually, in the last few years, I've found it to kind of be the opposite. Is that when I'm running into a lot of frustration, it means that I'm just doing something wrong. And I need to stop doing that, quit that, and
Yeah.
go to something that works and makes me feel happy. Because
Yeah.
10 years ago or 15 years ago when I was playing music, it was pure frustration. And I buckled down and worked harder and harder, and it just became more and more frustrating when really I should have just stopped doing that and changed methods a bit.
This week I read this sort of dialogue blog post thing um, between these different rowing coaches. So rowing, like,
Mm-hmm.
the sport of rowing. And one of the coaches who coached some successful team, one of the things he said was that the lazy rowers are the best rowers. And I'm like, that's a weird thing to say. But when after reading through what they're talking about, it kind of made sense, and that these coaches were talking about the physiology behind rowing practice, and that all the training that these rowers do as they're trying to become better rowers. And they kind of fall into two categories. And one category is the racers, where pretty much all the time during practice, they're going all out. They're racing constantly. And then there's other rowers who are lazier, who you tell them, hey, go hop on the rower trainer thing and row for 45 minutes, and they just do, and they're not going as fast as they can for 45 minutes. They're just kind of doing a relaxed rowing. And the logic behind it is that I don't want to say too much about this because I don't really get the physiology, but you have different energy systems in your body. You have your aerobic system where you're using oxygen and you're creating ATP, and that's powering your muscles and whatnot. And that system is extremely sustainable in that you can breathe in oxygen, you can create this kind of energy, and you can pretty much do that indefinitely. And you also have the anaerobic system, which is where you are exceeding your ability to generate energy from that oxygen. You're burning up the glycogen stores and the stuff in your body. Like, you're essentially draining your battery because you're exceeding what you can replenish just from the air, and like this very efficient way of making energy. Whatever, not that relevant for what we're talking about. But these lazier rowers were using that aerobic system and essentially training the aerobic system by operating at this lower energy level, whereas the racers were always pushing into the anaerobic system, and they weren't really training that very efficient aerobic base. Now, of course, this is very sport dependent and whatever, but for this particular sport, that seemed to be what mattered the most, was having a really well-trained aerobic system. And so the ones who tried the hardest, they were trying the hardest based on this feeling that they needed to try really hard, but that did not translate into anything productive. In this particular case, it was the lazier ones who were just not trying as hard, who sort of happened to be training this system that worked out better for them. I'm not saying that applies everywhere, like you should never try hard, because clearly you should in some cases. The point is that the feeling of pushing yourself really hard, that's just sort of a feeling. It's not necessarily the thing that needs to happen. But we almost always go to that of, you gotta grit your teeth and, power through. But often enough, that just isn't the thing that's needed. And I think you're talking about music. That applies very much, that trying to power your way through being a good musician doesn't really lead to great decisions and good music. And like, people who are good music comes from people who are relaxed, not who are, trying their absolute hardest and frustrated. So I think that applies a lot here. And I think when it comes to quitting, a lot of times we are unwilling to do it because of that feeling of, I gotta keep going, when that often enough just isn't the right choice at all, whether that's on a large decision or a smaller one.
I don't want to talk because that was so good. We
Okay.
should just end there. Yes,
I'm glad
I
that
completely agree. I totally see the correlation. I just over the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, since we've been talking about, sparking joy in what you do, and just, I could not agree more. And yeah, like I said, I don't want to talk because I just feel like I'm gonna ramble on about just agreeing with you. But yeah,
I'm fine with that. um all right, well, should we wrap up there then? Any closing thoughts to
not really. I mean, quitting something there is no easy way to do it. I mean, it's this constant struggle of trying to figure out who you are that gives you that decision of, should I do it or should I quit doing it? And so, I mean, everyone has to constantly try to figure out who they are and make these decisions. And sometimes they're really hard to make. Like you had to go on a vacation in order to kind of see, from backing really far out to see that you needed to kind of let this thing go. And it's not easy to step away, and it's not easy to make these decisions. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know. Finding that sweet spot, the lazy rower, if you can find the things that feel natural and enjoyable to you, and stick. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to kind of sum up my scattered thoughts on this, from personal experience, I can say that an unwillingness to quit, it can be useful in certain situations. Like sometimes you need to grit your teeth and get through something, and that's the way you get something done, and that can be great. But just that mentality across the board has a cost, in that if you are unwilling to quit things, it makes it harder to start things or to change from one thing that isn't that productive to something that is. And I mean, I can tell you, it can lead to pretty serious problems. I'm not saying it's the only cause, but it contributed at least a lot to my social anxiety and reclusiveness. Uh, it causes me in a big way to be a procrastinator, where I don't want to do something because I always make it into such a big deal and I'm never willing to stop it once I start it. I think that's not really a good cycle. So there's a cost to not being willing to quit stuff. And I think taking our cultural bias towards never quit, always keep going, is not very healthy. There's some cases where that's the right way to think, but it's important to know that it is not always the right way to think. And like you were saying, most of the time I think stuff should ideally feel pretty good. Even if it's hard, it should be like a good kind of hard, not a
Yes.
frustrating, crappy kind of hard. And if it is, it's probably time to just step back and think about it. Make a bubble diagram or just write about it.
Agreed. This comment was from almost exactly 1 year ago, right?
Yeah, I almost to the day. So, if anyone's wondering, yeah, we take suggestions. It might just be a little while before we get around to it.
Yeah, but this is one I wanted to do for a long time.
Uh, yeah,
It's a good one.
it's a great question, and it's there's never going to be a straight answer to it, but worth thinking about.
All right, but now we have to quit the episode.
Yep. All right, we're gonna quit now. But thanks everybody for listening. Please leave us comments on YouTube or on our podcast platforms where comments are able to be left. uh, we would love some podcast reviews too if you'd like to help out the show. You can also support us, and there are links in YouTube and in the show notes on other platforms. We have some merch if you're interested in a coaster or a whiskey glass. But otherwise, we will see you in optimistically 1 week.